A man had only just stepped through the weather-beaten gate when he heard it a sound that didn't belong. It was the stifled whimper of his daughter, and it was coming from the derelict boathouse at the edge of the property. The scene that would greet him in the moments to follow was so gut-wrenching that even a man who had stared into the abyss of the deep sea for months on end would be frozen to the spot. But it was how he chose to act in the aftermath that would forever alter the heart of his small coastal town. One can cross oceans, navigate through the most treacherous storms, but sometimes the greatest distance is between two people, a distance measured in unspoken words and drawings that never found their way home. Arthur Finch sat in silence, a passenger on the ferry cutting through the grey, choppy waters, his hands resting in the exact same position they'd been in since the vessel left the mainland port. Between his feet was a scuffed, salt-stained duffel bag packed with the efficiency of a man used to tight quarters. His palms were damp not from the sea spray but from the worn sketchbook he clutched. The cover was warped by water damage, the blue ink of the drawings inside bled into faint, ghostly lines. It was the sketchbook he had just looked through for the third time since leaving the oil rig, and just as before the final pages left a dry, aching lump in his throat. "Daddy, I didn't have any toast today," Aunt Agnes said. "There was no more bread, but I saw the baker's van. I didn't ask for any because she would make me stay in the cold room. When you come home, please knock on the back door. The front one is always locked." The writing was shaky, slanted to the left. Each word was formed with the careful clumsiness of a child's hand still learning its strength but filled with a desperate resolve. Lily had written as if she feared someone would snatch the pencil away, or worse, that no one would ever see it at all. Arthur turned the page, his thumb tracing the faded edge of another drawing. Each page showed signs of being opened and closed many times. Some were slightly torn at the corners, as if a small hand had hesitated before turning them. One drawing had spots on it that looked like rain, but Arthur knew with a chilling certainty that no storm could make its way inside a sealed envelope. The ferry captain, a man with a face like a weathered map and kind eyes, broke the heavy silence. "That old bag tells a story. You've been away at sea." Arthur looked up, closing the sketchbook and tucking it securely beside his leg. "I just back after 3 years on the rigs." The captain nodded, his gaze fixed on the approaching shoreline. "Long time to be away." The silence settled between them again, broken only by the cry of gulls and the engine's low thrum. The ferry chugged along the coastline past rugged cliffs and hardy, wind-swept trees. As they neared the second inlet, the one that led to the gravel road connecting the fishing cottages, the captain spoke again, his voice a low murmur. "Don't know if you've heard, but they say that little girl at the old Finch place, the Croft woman's niece, spends a lot of time down in that rickety boathouse. Some say she's been in there for days at a time. Terrible thing." Arthur felt a cold dread wash over him. The name Finch wasn't common around these parts. He fought to keep his voice steady. "What's that you say? What girl?" The captain glanced at him in the reflection of the window, offering a sad, knowing half-smile. "Ah, nothing. You know how these small towns are. Full of gossip. Probably just a bit of discipline, nothing to worry about." Arthur didn't answer. He stared out at the grey water, but this time he saw nothing. His mind had become a swirling vortex of doubt and fear. The ferry continued its slow approach, bumping against the pier. But inside Arthur all sound seemed to fade away. The drawings, the words, they came back to him again and again, an echo in a forgotten place. He had left his daughter Lily in the care of Agnes, his late wife's sister, on the very day of the funeral. Lily was only 4 years old then. She still sucked her thumb and couldn't tie her own shoelaces. Agnes, dressed in a simple black dress at the service, had spoken with a calm, reassuring voice. "I'll look after her as if she were my own. You go. A house with a little girl needs a woman's touch." Arthur hadn't questioned it. He was a man accustomed to following plans and procedures. The raw grief of losing his wife had made him cling to anything that sounded like a solution. He thought he was doing the right thing. He believed that an experienced woman like Agnes, who was also his late wife's closest kin, would provide the stability his daughter needed. He only ever thought of that. For a moment Arthur's mind flashed back to the mail he'd received on the rig. Mostly it was typed company memos, official correspondence, letters from his crewmates. He'd never once received anything in a child's handwriting. There had never been any sign that Lily had tried to reach him. Not until old Silas, a fisherman and a friend of his father's, had sent him a small, padded envelope with a simple note. "I think you should see these before you come ashore." Arthur clenched his fists. The ferry rocked as it docked. The captain switched on a small radio. An old folk song began to play. A woman's haunting voice filled the small cabin. "I'm not an angel nor a ghost in a dream. I'm just a woman at a locked door wondering if someone's crying within." Arthur's lips pressed into a thin line as he looked down at the sketchbook in his lap. One of the last drawings was done in faint pencil, smudged but still legible. "Daddy, we don't have a window in my room anymore. A spider made a web above my bed. I didn't tell Aunt Agnes because last time she threw all my pillows out in the rain." Something inside Arthur's chest fractured. It wasn't a roar of rage or a flood of fury, but that quiet, creeping kind of pain that can tear you apart more than any blade. It was the silence of a father who wasn't there when his daughter needed him most. The ferry ramp lowered with a groan. The captain handed him his heavy duffel bag. Arthur thanked him and stepped onto the pier, his shoulders heavy but his stride firm. Ahead of him stretched the familiar gravel road that led to the old house, the one where Lily used to draw chalk mermaids on the garden wall. He didn't know if those walls or those drawings still existed. He didn't know if his daughter was still waiting for him. He didn't rush. He bent down, picked up a smooth, white pebble from the shore and slipped it into his pocket. Sometimes a father doesn't need a weapon, he just needs to know he's walking towards the one place on earth where he is needed most. "Lily, I'm home." There are things in life that don't need to be explained with words. You can sense a deep sadness just by seeing that the familiar, faded tablecloth has been replaced by one of stiff, stark white lace, or by feeling the strangeness that has seeped into a house that was once yours simply because the curtains no longer smell of sea salt and home. Arthur Finch stood before the old cottage where he had lived with his late wife. The house was no longer a home, it was a carefully polished frame from which every trace of the past had been scrubbed clean. The window frames had been replaced with gleaming modern ones, the walls were freshly painted a sterile white, and the wedding photograph that used to hang above the fireplace was gone. Not even a faint outline on the wall remained. Agnes Croft had changed everything. It was too clean, too perfect. Arthur's hand reached for the doorknob, then stopped. There was no barking from the old terrier. They used to have no sound of slippers shuffling on the tile as Lily ran to greet him. There was only silence, as if the place itself had decided to disown its own history. Arthur didn't knock. Instead, he walked around the house along the narrow side path. The rusty old boiler was still there, its paint peeling in flakes, its hinges groaning softly as he pushed past. The back garden no longer had the rose bushes his wife had so carefully tended. Only a few hardy seepings grew wild around the old stone bird bath. The washing line was still there, but it hung lower. Perhaps someone had adjusted it so it wouldn't block the view from the kitchen window, the view towards the boathouse. And that's when he heard the first sound. It wasn't a voice speaking, not a television or a radio. It was a vicious snarl spat from someone's throat. "Get up! Clean this mess this instant, you useless thing!" Then a sharp smack, the sound of a hand hitting flesh followed by a choked, drowned sob. Arthur moved faster, rounding the corner of the garden where the old boathouse stood. It was now covered with a thin, grey tarpaulin. Something was wrong, but he couldn't yet grasp what it was when another harsh cry cut through the air. "Without your mother you'd be no better than an animal. If it weren't for my charity you'd have starved by now." He tore the tarpaulin aside in one swift motion. In the dim light that filtered through the grimy window he saw his daughter Lily huddled on a pile of damp, rotting nets. Her thin nightdress was torn at the shoulder, her small feet were bare and scratched, and her hair was matted with dirt. Standing over her was Agnes, a leather belt clutched in her hand, her face flushed with rage. As he watched, Agnes shoved Lily with her foot towards the corner of the boathouse. Her small shoulder hit the damp wood, making the whole structure creak like a mournful sigh. Arthur didn't charge in. He remained frozen, a statue of disbelief. Only his hands moved, clenching into tight fists. His fingernails dug into his palms until he drew blood, but he made no sound, no cry of his own. There is no room for noise when a man has reached the deepest limit of his pain. He took a step forward, slid the rusty iron bolt on the door, which opened without a sound. Lily looked up. Her clouded, vacant eyes fixed on him and stayed there unblinking. The scent of salt engine oil and the clean wind of the open sea, the scent of her father, enveloped her completely. The little girl scrambled to her feet, nearly falling. Her legs wouldn't support her, but before she could make a sound, Arthur was there, scooping her up into his arms. Lily threw herself against his chest, burying her face in his dust-covered shirt. "Daddy." The word was a breath, a prayer. He held her tight, so tight. "I'm here." Agnes spun around. Her face went pale as a ghost. "Arthur, when did you get back?" "I was just..." She needed a little discipline. "The girl, you know how stubborn she can be." Arthur held Lily in his arms. "I left my daughter with her family," he said slowly, each word heavy as an anchor stone. "Not with a jailer." Agnes fumbled with the belt, stammering. "I've been looking after her all this time you've been away. It's tiring." "She doesn't listen. She's always just sitting there silent." "I'm afraid she's not well." Arthur remained silent. He looked at her not as a brother-in-law but as a father who had seen far too much to need another excuse. "Are you afraid she's not well, or are you afraid she'll tell someone what you've done to her?" Agnes turned even paler. Arthur walked out of the boathouse and across the garden. Each step he took left a faint, dusty footprint on the immaculately clean patio stones. "Where do you think you are taking her?" Agnes shrieked, following him. "You have no home, you have nothing." He didn't reply. There was only the small, quiet voice of his daughter in his ear. "Daddy, I'm not scared of being poor. I'm just scared of the old smell in the boathouse." Arthur held her tighter. The little girl pressed her face into her father's neck, breathing in the deep, familiar scent she had spent so many nights searching for among the folded shirts under her pillow, trying to imagine a shoulder, a back, a warmth that was absent in the darkness. The neighbors were beginning to peer out of their windows. The woman across the way pulled back her lace curtain. The old man from the fishmonger's stopped hosing down his stall, watching the tall man walk by with a bruised little girl in his arms. Nobody said anything. The silence wasn't of fear but of guilt. They had all seen. They had all known. But nobody had spoken. Arthur didn't look back. He walked through the rusty iron gate, and the hinge creaked one last time. This time it was closing a chapter, one filled with lies, appearances, and the crushing weight of silence. The girl in his arms asked softly, "Daddy, are you still angry with me?" Arthur paused for a moment, then shook his head. "No, Lily. None of this is your fault." A cool sea breeze drifted towards them. It didn't carry the smell of rot or the scent of flowers. It was just a quiet, soft wind, enough to blow away the chill of fear that still clung to the back of their necks. And as the sun dipped below the rooftops, Arthur knew that the rage inside him had burned itself out. All that remained was a single, unshakable resolve to get his daughter out of that boathouse, not just with his arms, but with his whole heart. The wind of the late season rattled the roof tiles of the small clinic on the hill. The thin, white curtains billowed inwards as if trying to hold on to the last rays of sunlight that had faded to the pale yellow of a dying memory. The sharp scent of antiseptic hung in the air as if it had been there for decades, soaked into the discolored walls. On a wooden desk by the window, a vase of wild daisies, tilted slightly, an imperfect gesture from someone who still held on to the habit of caring even though time had told them to surrender. There were only 3 people in the room. Lily sat on the examination chair, her legs dangling, not quite touching the floor. Her wrinkled dress fell just above her knees. Arthur stood behind her, his hand resting on his daughter's shoulder, never leaving it. He hadn't spoken a word since they entered, but his gaze followed every small, shallow breath the little girl took. Nurse Gable, her hair streaked with grey but her eyes as steady as the coastal rocks, leaned forward gently and lifted the collar of Lily's dress. A soft sigh escaped her lips. No one responded, but the room suddenly felt colder. She took her stethoscope, placed it on the child's back, and whispered as if speaking to herself. "Did you know they were locking her in the boathouse? More than once?" Arthur didn't answer. There was only the faint sound of him tightening his grip on the strap of his duffel bag, as if trying to keep his anger from erupting into words. He closed his eyes slowly, then opened them again as if to burn that question into his soul. The nurse moved her fingers gently along each mark. A scar below the shoulder blade, another on the inner thigh, still raw scratches, dark, purple bruises, some already fading to a sickly yellow. Signs of an old pain that had never been allowed to heal. Lily wasn't crying. She stared up at the bright, sterile light on the ceiling. Her eyes showed no resentment, just something that looked like waiting, as if she was still unsure if trust was worth the risk. Arthur knelt down, taking his daughter's hand in his. It was small and cold like a forgotten stone in a winter garden. "Daddy, if you are really back," Lily's voice was just a whisper so faint it might have vanished if not for the room's intense silence. Arthur nodded slowly but firmly. "You won't leave again?" "Not for a long time." This time the little girl didn't look away. She held his gaze. The question was a knife twisting through all the days on the rig when the letters he'd written had never received a reply. He tightened his grip on her hand, his lips firm, as if one more word might break his heart. Nurse Gable closed the file, wrote a few notes, then spoke in a quiet voice. "This needs to be reported to the authorities, but I imagine you don't expect much from them." Arthur just shook his head. It wasn't a lack of faith in the law but the certainty that some wounds can't be cleaned with paperwork. He knew that for his daughter to rise from that mire, the first thing she needed wasn't a sentence but a safe place where she could believe in tomorrow. Before they left, the nurse placed a hand on his shoulder, her eyes filled with concern. "I brought this up once with the councilman. They told me every family deals with its own business. I just hope you still have the strength to do what's right." Arthur bowed his head in a gesture of gratitude. He said nothing, but in his eyes there was something as hard as steel, as silent as stone, about to break free from the inside. Night fell quickly over the coast. The dim lights of the police station did little to illuminate the small window of the guest house where father and daughter were now taking refuge. Arthur sat at the small wooden table. An oil lamp cast a flickering glow on the crumpled drawings he had brought from the old house. Some were torn at the corners, the pencil lines nearly erased. They were the drawings that had never been sent. He opened each one, not reading aloud, but every word pierced his chest. "Daddy, they yelled at me today because I can't fold the sheets like Mummy did. Auntie says I'm pretending to be stupid. I sleep alone. There are mice outside. I wish Mummy was still here. Auntie says you are never coming back. I don't believe her. But if I'm wrong, will you forgive me?" Arthur stopped when he saw a smaller piece of paper, the writing firmer. It was probably from when Lily was even younger. It was slanted to the side as if she had written it in secret or in a hurry. "Sorry if I made Auntie mad. I miss my mummy so much." His hand trembled, not with rage but with the terrible, serene clarity of that one sentence. A little girl 6 or 7 years old apologizing for missing her mother. He stood up and walked to the bed. Lily was asleep, clutching a thin pillow. Her eyelids flickered as if she were dreaming. Arthur didn't wake her. He just laid his hand gently on her head. "Whatever you write, I'll read it," he whispered, a vow to himself. "Whether it's for your mother, for the wind, or for your imaginary friends, I will read it. Because it's the only way I have left to understand you after so many lost years." He sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the faint warmth of the little girl travel up his arm. Much later he whispered again, so low he seemed to fear the words would wake her. "No one has the right to take a child's memories away. And no one should ever use love as a weapon for punishment." The wind whistled through a gap in the door, moving the curtain like a silent witness. Arthur looked towards the misty sky where the hills seemed to be quietly watching over the town's dreams. He was no longer a retired seaman looking for a roof over his head. He was a father rebuilding trust from the ruins, one brick at a time, with his own two hands. There are wounds that don't make a sound but they live forever in a child's soul. And sometimes it's not courage that helps us face them, but a silence deep enough to hear them speak. In a place like Port Blossom where cruelty doesn't always have a visible shape, love needs a body, it needs a face, and sometimes it just needs a father willing to read what his daughter once wrote. On the old desk in the clinic there was a vintage clock. It didn't tick loudly. It was as quiet as a held breath in the chest of someone unaccustomed to waiting. The hour hand pointed to 4. The minute hand barely moved. Nurse Gable had been pacing back and forth, her cup of coffee long since gone cold. She said nothing, but her gaze was full of thought, like someone who has witnessed too many things they cannot speak of. In the hallway you could still see the faint, dried mud prints left by Lily's small feet stretching out before stopping at the office door. Inside, Arthur slept in a wooden chair, one hand resting on his daughter's leg, as if letting go for a single second meant losing her all over again. Lily stirred softly, her head resting on a folded jacket. Her face showed no real relaxation. In the dim light her brow was still slightly furrowed. No rooster crowed, no alarm bell rang. But Arthur's eyes snapped open. He stood for a long time in front of the wooden gate, as if trying to hear something through the cracks of a house that was no longer his. The wind carried the scent of dead leaves mixed with a cheap floral perfume. The air no longer smelled of damp, old plaster, but of something artificial like makeup covering bruised skin. The great oak that used to shade the front garden on hot days was now just a crude stump, its branches roughly hacked off like open, unhealed wounds. Each step Arthur took towards the door stirred buried memories, and he was no longer sure if this place deserved to be called home. Arthur knocked. The sound wasn't loud, but it rang out with piercing clarity in the dead silence. The door opened. Before him stood Agnes, her hair styled in soft waves, her lips painted a bright red, a smile on her face as if nothing had happened. "What are you here for now? The girl is being cared for at the clinic. Isn't that what you wanted?" Her voice held no trace of shame or discomfort, it was disturbingly serene. Behind Agnes stood Mrs. Rivas, the neighbor who always believed she had a right to know everything. She was holding a cup of tea, her eyes darting from Arthur to the canvas bag he was carrying. "For my identity papers, my family records, and for Lily's, and everything that belongs to her." Arthur's voice wasn't harsh or demanding. It was cold and slow, like a man who is no longer shocked by betrayal. Agnes gave a weak, dry laugh that had a sharp edge. "And what are you going to support her with?" "Your old rig worker's pension." "With honor?" Arthur looked her straight in the eye and answered without raising his voice. "With something you've never had. The decency not to look the other way while my daughter was living like she was worthless. That's enough." Mrs. Rivas entered the conversation with the deliberately placating tone of a mediator. "Really, now? We all know around here that Agnes loved that child as if she were her own. Everyone says so." Arthur didn't look at her. He slipped past her through the door, heading towards the living room without waiting for an invitation. On the wall the family photos had been replaced. Lily was no longer in any of the frames. In her place a new picture. Agnes posing alone on a sunny beach. "Where are my papers?" Agnes crossed her arms and leaned against the door frame. "I don't have anything. Ask at the police station. Though, do you want me to give you some money?" Don't let raising a child be too complicated for you for old times' sake, you know. Arthur remained silent, opening the drawer of an old cabinet and pulling out a thin envelope containing copies of the family registry and birth certificates. They were old papers, but they were enough to confirm a bond that no one could erase. As he left, his gaze swept over Agnes as if he were seeing someone who had died long ago. That night, as the wind began to whistle through the cracks of the guest house, they heard a soft knock on the door. Arthur opened it to see a woman with a shawl wrapped tightly around her, clutching a small bag. "Remember me? I'm Brenda Solis. I worked at the house for a time. I won't stay. I just came to deliver this." Arthur invited her in, but she shook her head. Brenda placed the bag on the table and took out a small, old mobile phone with worn buttons. "That's Lily's voice, recorded one night in June. I heard her crying, begging from the boathouse. I couldn't stand it. I went to the constable, but Agnes has influence. No one wanted to listen to me." Arthur pressed play. From the small speaker came the voice of a child, broken, weak, as if struggling for air. "It's so cold I can't breathe. Somebody please open the door." No comment. "No thank you." Arthur bowed his head and closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, they were red but dry. "Agnes has a biological son," Brenda whispered. "But she sent him away to a boarding school when he was just a boy. Never asked about him since. She only ever wanted a witness to her own supposed kindness." Arthur wasn't surprised, not shocked. He just held the phone, squeezing it lightly. We always think that in a small town things are quickly forgotten, but they are not. In small towns, ears are closer to the ground. People see, people hear. They are just afraid. Brenda left from the doorstep without leaving a trace. Just before she disappeared at the end of the alley leading to the main street, she paused for a moment and turned back. Her voice was barely audible but clear enough for Arthur to remember it forever. "Not everyone stays silent because they have no heart. Some are just waiting for someone else to be brave enough so they know they're not alone." Arthur closed the door carefully. He walked back towards the bed. Lily was still asleep, her cheeks flushed from the warmth of the room. Her small hands were closed over her chest, no longer hanging like limp branches. Her sleeping posture now resembled a cocoon finally covering its most vulnerable part. He placed the phone in a drawer, then sat beside her. For the first time he felt that his soul was no longer as heavy as the previous night's stone. The town wasn't as small as many believed. Sometimes it just kept quiet to listen for those who dared to speak. The first soft light of dawn slid over the low brick walls, falling diagonally across a white sheet hanging on the line in the backyard. The fabric didn't smell of soap as you might expect, but of the sweat of the person who had boiled the water and washed it by hand. Arthur Finch held a small aluminium bucket, his hands tense as he wrung out a faded beige dress, his face tilted as if in conversation with the earth. In a corner of the yard, Lily sat in the shade of a gnarled apple tree, hugging her knees, watching an ant drag a crumb of bread she had hidden that morning. There was no crying but no laughter either. Arthur continued to wash in silence, as if that silence was the only thing that allowed father and daughter to breathe in that small, borrowed house. When Lily agreed to drink half a glass of milk at midday, Arthur didn't celebrate or praise her. He just placed a hand on her head, a gentle pat, and left the plastic cup beside her. They understood each other without words. The girl was afraid of the light. Every time a window was opened, she would retreat to a corner and pull a blanket over herself. Arthur knew this, but he didn't force her. Instead, he brought her out onto the porch every evening as dusk fell, letting the twilight take away a little bit of the fear, letting only the wind caress her forehead. At night, when the two of them sat on the old wooden bed, Arthur would take out his old stringless mahogany guitar. He would pluck slow, single notes and sing in a low voice. "Sleep now, little one, the sun has gone down, the stars are watching over your slumber now." His voice wasn't perfect, but it was warm. Lily would slowly close her eyes. Her eyelids would flutter, then still. Her breathing would become even. Arthur watched her without looking away. A long time later, he would let out a deep sigh as if giving thanks to a sky he couldn't see. The daughter of a seaman doesn't need pity. She just needs a place where no one will make her be afraid again. The next morning, as the sound of birdsong mixed with the smell of frying eggs, Lily picked up her spoon on her own. Arthur pretended to be busy folding clothes so as not to look directly at that moment, but his hands trembled slightly when he heard the clink of the spoon against the edge of the bowl. He waited until she had finished most of her food and then said, "I'm going to see someone today. Will you come with me?" Lily looked up. Her eyes didn't have the bright shine of children who have been unconditionally loved, but in them there was a small spark, a silent, firm consent. The town's primary school was behind the old church. Its roof was damaged, but the walls were still painted a faded, peeling yellow. Arthur walked with his daughter. Every step was a test, walking through the streets of a town where everyone looked but no one spoke. Mr. Davies, the librarian, was sorting books when Arthur knocked on the chipped wooden door. The old teacher frowned slightly, then squinted as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He left the books on the desk and approached. "Arthur, is that you? And this must be Lily." Arthur managed a nod as Lily took half a step back, clinging to the edge of her father's shirt. Mr. Davies looked at her with an expression that came from a very distant place, as if he had once stood in the rain without an umbrella and now could only look at the puddles that remained. "I still have that notebook you gave me," he said slowly. "There's a drawing in it where you are standing next to someone in a uniform holding a loaf of bread." Arthur said nothing, but Lily lifted her head. She looked at him for a few seconds, then pressed her lips together. No one told her to. But she took a step closer. Mr. Davies knelt down and opened his arms. Lily sunk into his embrace. The father, standing next to them, clenched his fists. At midday, under a sun as dry as sand, Arthur went to the town's police station. He presented the photos of his daughter's injuries, along with the medical report and a handwritten letter detailing what had happened. The officer on duty, a man in a faded shirt, avoided his eyes as if afraid of the honesty that shone from the father. "We'll need stronger evidence," Arthur replied with calm resolve. "I think this is enough to open a file. You see, this case isn't simple." "It isn't simple," Arthur repeated. "My daughter was locked in a boathouse. She has belt marks on her back. And still it's not clear enough to write one line." The officer scratched his head and whispered, "It's Mrs. Croft. She has relatives on the town council. I can't guarantee you that the file will get where it needs to go." Arthur nodded without expression, got to his feet and picked up his documents. "Thank you." His voice wasn't angry, but it was dense, like a stone dropped into deep water. In the afternoon, while Arthur was on the porch with his daughter, his small guitar by his side, a woman appeared at the gate. She wore a worn tweed jacket, a wide-brimmed hat, her face weathered by the sun, and her eyes full of history. "You are Arthur?" "Yes. My name is Eleanor. I used to be a social worker here with Agnes." Arthur nodded, not knowing what to expect from her. "I work in the village school now. 2 years ago I defended a little girl from being mistreated. It was Lily." Arthur's breath caught but didn't break. "Agnes invented a story that I had stolen money from the school fund. They fired me. No one believed me because she has influence with the head of the Parents Association." Arthur didn't ask for more details, he just listened. Eleanor looked towards the window where Lily was hiding behind the curtain. "If you need someone to testify, I'll go to court." "Why?" Arthur asked. Eleanor pressed her lips together. "Because I don't want another mother to have the right to trample on a little girl just because she can shout louder." Arthur was silent for a long time. "Thank you," he said. The words were quiet but solid. That night Lily went to bed early. Arthur was left in the light of the oil lamp, plucking chords on his guitar. It wasn't a lullaby or a sad melody, just a few uncertain but true notes. Like the path he was now walking. In the distance, Eleanor looked back at the gate one more time. She thought that maybe this is what they call justice, but it doesn't always arrive with sirens or subpoenas. Sometimes it arrives with a trembling hand that dares to knock on a door one more time to tell a story that was once silenced by a girl who didn't know how to scream. Arthur carefully lifted the lid of the grey file box. Inside, resting on top, was the official confirmation that the complaint had been filed with the county court. The ink was fresh and the full name of the defendant, Agnes Croft, was printed in bold. He didn't read it again. It wasn't necessary. The words didn't matter as much as the warmth in his hand when Lily gently squeezed his finger and asked, "So they're really going to make her go see the judge, Daddy?" Arthur looked at his daughter. In her bright brown eyes was something that made him hold his breath. It wasn't fear but a naive faith, too big for a girl who had lived so long in silence. He didn't answer with words. He just nodded slowly. From the clinic's hallway, firm footsteps could be heard on the linoleum floor. Mrs. Carmen Vance, her hair now silver but her back still straight, appeared with a stack of documents in her hand. Her look towards Arthur was no longer one of suspicion but of respect and solidarity. "Good. I printed 3 copies. One for the court, one for the police, and the last one for you." "Thank you, ma'am." Arthur took them carefully, his eyes resting on the red seal that shone in the light. Eleanor sat down and poured a glass of lemonade with ice that she had brought with her. She didn't ask for permission or wait for approval. For her, helping Arthur wasn't a favor, it was a moral obligation. She had been the head nurse at the local hospital until Agnes had her dismissed for refusing to ignore the bruises on Lily's back. "Do you know why no one said anything back then?" Arthur shook his head. "Because all the reports of child abuse in her family disappeared. It wasn't a system failure. It was one person, someone she was hiding, like her last trump card." She paused, took a sip of her drink and added, "Agnes is the cousin of Deputy Mayor Cardenas." Arthur frowned. He vaguely remembered the name from the local news when he was still on shore leave. They said Mr. Cardenas was a man of the people, but behind the white beard and the political smile he now understood. There are cruelties that don't need a whip, just an official stamp. Eleanor handed him a thin folder. Here is a list of complaints that were sent to the county's Child Protection Committee but never reached headquarters. Arthur turned the pages one by one. The name Lily Finch appeared 3 times. Twice signed by her teacher and once by the old librarian, all crossed out in red ink with the annotation "insufficient evidence." Arthur pressed his lips together. His hand trembled not with fear but with rage. They had tried, but a wall of power had swallowed them. That night, while all of Port Blossom slept, Arthur sat down to write a letter by hand, something he hadn't done since he left the rig. He sent it to his Aunt Bernarda in Cornwall, the woman who had helped care for Lily when his wife was still alive. He didn't expect much, just a hint, something that hadn't come from Agnes. 3 days later, a blue envelope arrived in the mail. The sender, Aunt Bernarda, her handwriting firm just like her character always was. Arthur, did you know that Agnes abandoned a child in an orphanage when she was 19? She never told anyone. But I remember it well because it was I who drove the baby to the shelter's door that year. Arthur stood still on the steps. The yellowed letter hit him with the force of an undeniable truth. He had always seen Agnes as selfish, deceitful, cold, but he had never imagined that the woman he had lived under the same roof with could abandon her own blood. He didn't cry. He just felt his eyes burn as if desert dust had been thrown in his face. And a silent question rose within him. How many years had he lived next to someone like that? Without knowing. The next day Lily approached silently as Arthur was reviewing the files. She said nothing, she just handed him a drawing on a piece of light yellow paper. It's for you, Daddy. The drawing was simple. An open boathouse, and next to it a girl in a torn dress holding the hand of a tall man with a faint scar on his cheek. The sky wasn't blue but orange. The color, Lily said, that looked like the sunset when he carried her out of the boathouse. Arthur placed the drawing on the table. With his finger he gently traced the lines that were still fresh. That girl looks like she knows how to walk on her own now because she's not afraid anymore. Why? Lily didn't look up, she just whispered, because the other one doesn't make her sleep with the spiders anymore. A week later, at a meeting at the social services office, Arthur overheard something from a newly arrived clerk. Agnes had been applying for government assistance as the foster mother of a child orphaned of her mother, claiming the father was absent due to force majeure. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. For the 4 years he had been on the rigs missing, his daughter Agnes had been receiving a monthly stipend from the government as a foster parent, an amount that was not insignificant. And she hadn't used it for Lily. What had she used it for? Arthur didn't need to guess. The expensive dresses, the trips to visit relatives, the late nights coming back smelling of wine, it all made sense now. With the statement in his hand, he turned and left. There was no more rage in his chest, just an urgent need. This time justice had to have a name and a surname. Not everyone has the strength to forgive, but everyone deserves to be called by their real name. Arthur walked slowly down the government building's corridor. The last door at the back was the special inspector's office. He straightened his shirt and clutched Lily's drawing. The little girl didn't need a foster mother, she needed something else, a father who knew how to say with certainty, enough. And then he walked in. He didn't knock, he didn't hesitate, he didn't ask for permission to tell the truth he had buried during his years as a seaman, because this time he wasn't fighting for his country. He was fighting for a girl who had once had to sleep next to rotting nets. Not everyone who sits in the defendant's chair has committed a crime, but the truly cruel ones often speak the sweetest before the law. In Port Blossom, the old-timers used to repeat that phrase, especially on windless days when everything seemed calm but the air smelled of a coming storm. Arthur Finch didn't look in the mirror. He tied his shoelaces tightly, his shirt was wrinkled but the seams were straight. The suit he wore wasn't new nor was it old, just black and sober like his gaze as he stood before the county courthouse. The small bag he carried didn't contain documents. Inside was a worn, grey dress torn at the hem with a heart-shaped patch sewn on by hand. It was the dress Lily had been wearing the day she was locked away. He didn't need to bring his daughter, he just needed to challenge them with her undeniable silence. The preliminary hearing began at 9. The room wasn't full but it wasn't empty either. Some of the town's residents occupied the back benches, some with familiar faces, others just out of curiosity. Mr. Davies, the librarian, had arrived early with his straw hat and an old notebook. Brenda Solis, the former housekeeper, sat next to Nurse Gable. Eleanor Vance's face was tense but not with hatred. Agnes Croft entered escorted by 2 female officers. She wore a light-colored dress, her lips painted red. Her walk reflected no guilt. When she sat down, she sketched a smile, a mixture of arrogance and contempt. "Your Honor," she began in a loud, steady voice. "I don't deny I was strict, but since when is disciplining a child considered a crime? I never hit her, I only corrected her." Arthur didn't move. He placed the dress on the table in front of him, carefully folded. When Agnes smiled a second time, he looked her straight in the eye without blinking. That smile had deceived him once but never again. "We will present the evidence," the prosecutor said while handing them a USB drive. The courtroom screen lit up. An audio recording played, no images, no faces, just a harsh, cruel voice. "Ungrateful. You are a burden, a debt I have to pay. If you want to eat, you learn to obey." The audio was played twice. In the room, some of the older women lowered their heads, their hands clenched with force. A young man in the front row adjusted his shirt collar, his face tense. "Next, the images of the injuries," the prosecutor added in a calm but clear tone. The photos appeared one by one, bruises, scratches, the clear mark of a belt across her back. Nurse Gable was called to testify. She recounted how she had received Lily with signs of malnutrition, pale skin, and old scars that hadn't healed. "They weren't just physical injuries," she said without taking her eyes off the file. "There was deep emotional damage. The girl didn't cry, she didn't laugh, she didn't react like other children. Fear was marked in her reflexes." Agnes tried to smile and looked at her defense lawyer. He was a tall man in a brown suit, a man of few words. He simply bowed his head once and asked to present the defense's evidence. "We request this document be reviewed not to justify but to clarify a misunderstanding." He opened a beige folder and placed a bank statement before the judge. "This is the statement of Mrs. Croft's account for the last 3 years. Note the line of expenses corresponding to the child support authorized by Arthur Finch before he was deployed for military service. A silence fell over the room. Arthur frowned slightly. The lawyer continued. Between July of last year and January of this year, Mrs. Croft withdrew over £7,000 from the fund. However, in her expenses there is no line item allocated for education, health or child nutrition. In its place there are payments for cosmetics, furniture and 2 trips to London. Agnes gripped the edge of her chair. The colour drained from her face. The prosecutor stood up. He said nothing more, just submitted a copy of the budget analysis that matched the account movements. So how does the defendant explain the use of a fund for the care of a minor to cover personal expenses? The judge asked. Agnes opened her mouth but no sound came out. She looked at Arthur as if searching for a reaction that could save her, but he remained seated silent with his hand resting on his daughter's dress. We are not just looking at the actions, the prosecutor concluded, but also the intent. And the intent here was not education but exploitation. It wasn't love, it was confinement. Mr. Davies bowed his head and murmured something that sounded like a prayer. Brenda clasped her hands together, her eyes misty. She didn't cry out loud. In the courtroom no one let out a cry. Neither Arthur nor those who knew the story needed tears to understand the pain. After the court's deliberation, the presiding judge delivered the sentence. Agnes Croft was found guilty of child endangerment, misuse of social welfare funds and for intentionally causing prolonged psychological harm. She was sentenced to 12 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Arthur stood up. He didn't applaud, he didn't bow his head. He just picked up the dress and left the room through the main door. On the stairs next to the iron gate was a small bicycle. Lily was sitting there. She had been waiting for him since early morning. Arthur wasn't surprised. "Are you cold?" he asked. "No. I just wanted to see that you were the first one to leave," Lily answered without hesitation. Arthur placed the dress in the bicycle's basket and then gently ran his hand over her head. "Let's go home." "Yes?" Lily didn't reply, she just nodded her head. And in the small square in front of the courthouse no one was laughing. Nor was anyone crying. But everyone present watched them go, a father who didn't need words to win, and a girl who didn't need to cry out to be heard, because sometimes justice just needs that. They say there are winds that don't just pass over rooftops, but carry away what people believed would last forever. Arthur knew this wasn't poetry, but the way the old folks of Port Blossom expressed what they had lived through for too long not to understand. He didn't go straight home after the verdict. He passed by the old village shop, bought 2 bags of rice, a bunch of vegetables and a bag of white chalk. No one asked him why he needed the chalk. They just looked at him, nodded their heads and greeted him. Silence can also be a form of repentance, sometimes more powerful than a spoken apology. Lily was waiting for him on the porch. She didn't ask about the outcome of the trial. She just held out her hands to take the bags and walked into the kitchen as if that day were just like any other. Arthur didn't say anything either. There are things that don't need to be named if someone wants to hold them in their heart. The old house still had its foundations. The bricks stuck out of the ground as if they were breathing. Arthur removed the broken bricks, dismantled the rotten wood and piled it up in the back. He didn't keep anything that reminded him of Agnes, not even the faded picture frames nor the high-heeled shoes that had once stepped on Lily's childhood, and even less the floral curtains that had forced the girl to spy on the world as if it were a crime to exist. He burned them. The fire didn't rage like in the movies, but the smell of burning fabric mixed with old ashes made anyone who looked have to turn away. Lily approached, sat down beside him without a word. After a while she asked in a small voice, "Daddy, can I show the alphabet to Elisa? She still doesn't know the difference between D and B." Arthur didn't answer right away. He looked at the flames, then at his daughter's eyes where there were no longer tears, only a shyness that was beginning to turn into resolve. He nodded. A gentle gesture, but Lily understood it was a promise. Her father wasn't going to leave her again. The first classroom was set up on a windy day. Arthur chose a piece of land behind the house where the sun hit gently. With some neighbors they stuck reeds into the ground, hung a tarpaulin as a roof, and built desks with recycled planks. No one asked for payment or conditions. One brought a hammer, another contributed nails, and there were those who just watched, but the next day left a bottle of sugared water at the entrance. On the day of the opening, 5 children sat in a row with their hands on the edges of their desks and their eyes wide as if it were summer. Lily stood in front of a makeshift blackboard with a piece of chalk between her fingers as if it were a magic stone. She looked at Arthur, took a deep breath, and said slowly, "My name is Lily. I used to live with spiders, but now I live with books." There was a soft laugh, a murmur about a pretty little girl. But Arthur turned away discreetly as if dust had gotten into his eyes. No one named the emotion, but everyone understood it. At midday, as the wind changed direction, a man entered the yard. He wore an old shirt, faded jeans, and a straw hat folded in his hands. He didn't knock or approach the classroom directly. He just stood there silently as if waiting for permission to return. Arthur was washing his hands in the backyard, looked up and met his gaze. For a moment the air stood still. "Are you Mr. Arthur Finch?" the man asked in a clear but calm voice. "Yes." "Who's asking?" "It's Leo." The name took Arthur a few seconds to place. He looked closely at his face, then at his thin, suntanned hands with a disturbing familiarity. "You're Agnes' son." The man nodded. "I'm not here to complain about anything. I just wanted to see Lily, if that's possible." Arthur clenched his fists for an instant, then let them go. He made a sign for him to enter without showing any emotion. Lily was cleaning the blackboard. Upon seeing the stranger, she took a step back instinctively. Arthur placed a hand on her shoulder as a signal of calm. "This is Leo. He's Mrs. Agnes' son, which means in a way he's your brother." Lily said nothing. Her eyes weren't afraid, they just looked with caution as if at a new page, not knowing where to begin. Leo sat down without interrupting. When Lily turned back to the blackboard to write the letter C, he murmured, "My mother left me when I was 3. I don't remember her face, but I heard she had a daughter in Port Blossom. I didn't come to reclaim the past, just to tell you that you are not the only one who was left behind." Lily didn't turn around, but the chalk trembled for a moment. Arthur remained silent. No one tried to connect anything. They just let that confession exist on its own, like an echo between two children who had grown in different cracks of the same wound. In the afternoon, Leo left. Before he left a notebook on the table. Whatever she writes, leave it here. I won't bother you. I just want to know that she's okay. Arthur nodded. There were no hugs or awkward handshakes, just a silent recognition between two men abandoned by the same woman. Lily sat on the steps. The afternoon sun lit up her soft hair. She didn't ask anything, she just said, "Daddy, how do you write, Leo?" Arthur laughed, a low but serene laugh. "You write it just as it sounds. The important thing is that you remember their names. The old folks in the village say that the first wind is always cold, but if there's a fire in the heart, any place can feel warm." Arthur didn't believe in philosophy, but he believed in the hand of his little daughter Lily, which had once been covered in dirt and now held in to write the future. And he knew that her fire was bright, silent but alive. There are children who carry a dark childhood on their shoulders. Not because they made a mistake, but because the adults didn't know how to love the right way. In a world where gentleness has sometimes become a luxury, a single quiet word is enough to open a door that never had a name. No one noticed the old bicycle parked next to the palm tree in the backyard of the school. It had been there for a while, as silent as its owner. A quiet teenager with scars on his hands and eyes that avoided contact. Leo came from a place where no one wanted to talk. He wasn't a bad boy, but no one had ever taught him how to be one either. When Mr. Arthur rebuilt the old house to turn it into a classroom, Leo was the first to arrive, not to study but to watch. He stayed outside the fence for 3 days. On the 4th day, Mr. Arthur held out a broom. He didn't say anything, just nodded. From then on, Leo never left. Leo was fixing the tarp roof, his hands calloused but steady. Each brick was placed with precision, as if it had never trembled. Mr. Arthur below held the wooden ladder with both hands. "You have to put the thinner plank there. The wind was strong last night. It almost blew away half the roof," he said without looking at him, lifting the plank upwards. Leo took it without a word. He was used to receiving orders, but this time it wasn't an order, it was trust. Under the tree, Lily spread out a cotton blanket. On it, a wooden box containing all sorts of things: threads, old buttons, loose beads, even a piece of a broken radio antenna. With dedication, she was assembling something with her hands. Her eyes lit up every time she managed to tie a perfect knot. Around noon, Lily approached without making a sound. In her hand, a small keychain made of copper wire and carved wood. In the middle, a small piece of leather with the letter L engraved on it. "It's for you," she said in a small voice. Leo didn't take it right away. He looked at it, then he looked at her. In her eyes there was no fear or suspicion, just something that looked a lot like faith. He finally accepted it and nodded slightly. As Lily turned to leave, he heard a soft whisper. "Don't lose it." "Okay." Leo stood still for a few seconds. That word "okay" had entered his chest like a brand. It had been a long time since anyone had called him that. His mother Agnes, whose name now only echoed in the courthouse, used to call him a burden. In the afternoon, Mr. Arthur spread a paper map on the wooden table in the classroom. Both of them sat in front of him. There were red circles marking the areas of the town where there were abandoned children, those who had dropped out of school or lived with relatives in extreme poverty. "I received some money from the government after what happened with Agnes came to light," Arthur said in a calm voice. I don't want to use it for revenge. I want to create a place for children like Lily like you. Leo said nothing, but for the first time he felt that someone didn't see him as an obstacle. Leo, what do you think if we call it the Port Blossom Support Fund? Leo nodded. You buy the books, the food, I'll keep the records if you trust me. Mr. Arthur smiled slightly. Of course, I trust you. Ever since the day you didn't have lunch, and instead you left it next to the house of that disabled girl near the stream. Leo looked down without answering. The following days the townspeople began to come to the school. At first only a few curious parents. Then came the mothers, the grandparents, bringing rice, notebooks, even cooked chicken. Arthur refused any payment. At the entrance hung a scorched wooden sign. We trade letters for trust at no cost. The children ran through the dirt yard, and Lily laughed every time they called her little teacher. Some brought puppies, others dragged old wheelbarrows as desks. For them it was their first school. That night the moon was as bright as silver foil. The wind moved smoothly between the new tiles. Leo was alone at the wooden table, his notebook open, a small pencil in his hand. The classroom door was left ajar. Mr. Arthur entered with a glass of water. You are not sleeping tonight? Leo nodded without looking up. Mr. Arthur sat in front of him. I think you already know what's happening. Leo's gaze darkened. In the letter she sent from prison, she asked someone to burn down the little school. I read it all. I didn't reply. I'm not going to warn the police. Leo looked up, and for the first time, his voice sounded firm and cutting. She's my biological mother, but I don't owe her anything. Arthur nodded. Whatever you decide to do is your right. I won't pressure you. They were both silent for a while. The night continued with the faint chirp of crickets around the yard while the moon bent its light over the old wooden table. Leo put the notebook in a drawer, locked it, and then took the keychain Lily had made him out of his pocket. He handed it to Arthur and said in a small voice, I don't keep it because it's pretty. I keep it because it's the first time someone has called me family. Arthur didn't answer. He just gently patted his shoulder. In every person's life there is a moment when they understand that blood doesn't decide everything, but a hand extended in just the right moment can save a soul, and that soul one day will be the one to keep the fire of kindness alive so that it never goes out. The door of the little school remained open all night. The wind blew through the cracks in the planks, but the light remained on. It didn't come from a bulb, but from something that had never had a name. No one noticed that the flowers in front of Arthur's house had changed. They no longer looked withered like last year, but they didn't shine with an ostentatious flourish either. The purple petals bloomed in small clusters, falling here and there on the packed earth. To one side, rows of soft corn already as tall as a grown man's chest were beginning to show their first cobs, signaling a promising harvest. Inside the house, the old pendulum clock on the wall didn't mark time with the same stability. Its hand now trembled and took a half step back, as if it too wanted to pause for a moment to preserve the moments lived under that roof. Lily said that the clock was like her father's time. It didn't run fast, nor did it leave anyone behind. That morning began with the faint, light sound of ceramic plates. Leo was carefully washing each wooden spoon while Lily, with a pencil, was organizing the day's schoolwork. At the table, Arthur carefully folded a letter of invitation from a neighboring town. Then he tucked it between the pages of a hardcover notebook. In the letter they invited him to receive an honorary recognition, a diploma for his work in educational development in rural areas along with a small financial reward. But Arthur didn't answer it. Instead he sat at the bamboo table and wrote another letter addressed to a small association of young people in another county who had once expressed a desire to teach poor children. We don't need diplomas, we need people capable of looking a child in the eye and understanding that they deserve to be heard. Outside the children were already gathering. In the distance you could hear them calling to each other, dragging their sandals on the earth, their laughter mixing with barking. The backyard of the Finch house was no longer just a place to learn the alphabet but a refuge where poor children felt they belonged somewhere again. Each one came with their own story but everyone shared something. No one wanted to be forgotten. Lily stood in front of the blackboard with a piece of worn white chalk and said in a clear, sweet voice, "Today we are going to learn the letter S for sigh and also for solidarity." A little boy raised his hand. "Why does solidarity start with a sigh, teacher?" She hesitated for a moment and then smiled. "Because sometimes we only learn to love each other after we have gone through a very great sadness." Arthur left the house with his old faded shirt on and a basket of fresh mangoes he had harvested in his hands. He left it on the bamboo table without interrupting his daughter's class, just sat and listened from the background. Old Mr. Davies, the one who used to sell seeds, also happened to pass by that day. He sat on the edge of the porch chewing on a piece of cane, his eyes half closed as if he were dozing. But when Lily finished reading a poem, he was the first to applaud. "The girl reads like water flowing between stones," he murmured. "So soft that you don't even feel the scars." In the middle of the class, Leo placed a wooden doll that he himself had made in front of the classroom. Leo, who used to live in silence, was now the first to speak up in the mornings, marking the start of the class with a drum. Arthur didn't hide his pride. He turned to Mrs. Clotilde, who often brought sweet bread to share, and whispered to her, "Sometimes I think children don't need us to teach them so much. They just need not to be afraid." The old woman nodded, smoothing her shawl. "No one can grow if every morning you wake up not knowing where you'll eat or who you'll learn with." That night the light of the kerosene lamp cast trembling shadows on the ceiling. Arthur sat between Lily and Leo while two other children occupied the other side of the table, each hugging their bowl of vegetable soup. They didn't talk about the past. No one mentioned Agnes. No one asked Arthur about the rigs, the sea, or the night that had changed their lives. All that was left behind a closed door. Lily served her father a piece of tortilla with egg. Leo said that one of the hens had laid a double-yolked egg. A little girl said, "When I grow up I'm going to open a school with a green board, fans, and even a corner for the puppies to sleep under the tables." Arthur laughed. "Just don't let the mice learn first or they'll take all the notebooks." The laughter sounded light as if the wounds had never existed. A week later a celebration was held for the start of the new school year. Lily took a small microphone that the townspeople had given her and opened the ceremony by singing a traditional English lullaby. Her voice wasn't powerful, but it was sweet and firm like a cactus flower blooming among the rocks. Arthur stepped forward after the song. He stood up straight with a crumpled paper in his hand but didn't read it right away. "I was once asked what the most painful thing was after the war. I thought it was the wounds, but it wasn't. The most painful thing was coming back and finding that my daughter had been treated like garbage in her own home. He paused, looking around at the children sitting on the floor with their clear eyes full of maturity. Today I am here to show you the opposite, to prove that a child, even after being thrown into a boathouse, can teach others with kindness. Thank you for not abandoning my daughter. Thank you for helping me believe in people again. The applause wasn't thunderous, but it was deep. At that moment Arthur looked at Lily. In the afternoon, when all the children had left, Arthur was repairing the benches. Lily was hanging a new drawing on a string stretched between two mango trees. It showed a girl surrounded by a circle of other children, and below it was written in purple ink, "You can be thrown into a boathouse, but no one has the right to decide a child's worth." Arthur stared at the drawing, his eyes lost. Then he said, as if speaking to himself, "There is no greater pain than seeing your daughter forgotten, but there is no greater miracle than seeing her stand up and show the world her worth with kindness." Lily didn't answer, she just stood there. She knew that from that moment on the real old past was buried, and what would sprout from there would be a future with wind, sun, and the sound of children calling to each other to learn under the trees. Perhaps we've all heard a heartbreaking story about children rejected by their own relatives, but this story doesn't stop at the pain. It is proof that patience, compassion, and a love for the truth can heal even the deepest wounds. Arthur didn't choose violence or shout for justice. He simply pulled his daughter out of the mire of cruelty and started over, one brick, one letter, one look at a time. And with that quiet determination, he made an entire community reflect and change. Those who did harm ultimately paid for it, and those who chose love were rewarded with the most valuable thing of all, peace. Have you ever met a child who was abandoned? Have you ever witnessed a father or mother who gave everything in silence? Do you think you would have the courage to put yourself on the side of the light? What do you think of the way Arthur chose to protect his daughter? If you were in his place, would you have acted the same? And if you are a father, a mother, a grandparent, or just an adult, what do you think is the most important thing for a child not to feel forgotten? Share your feelings in the comments, and if this story touched your heart, keep a space inside you for the children who are still waiting to be heard. Have a peaceful day. Thank you for staying until the end.